That is the process. Now, they may say, oh, you're demeaning the process by treating it flippantly, but whether they're serious or not about the process, is that the process you want for someone in America? Do you want in America for the process for you being accused of a crime to be a PowerPoint presentation by one branch of government, maybe in a political party you're part of, maybe in a political party you're not a part of? There are things in politics that are partisan. I don't think I would want Americans to be subject to any partisanship with determining whether you get the Fifth Amendment, whether you get a jury trial. I can't imagine anybody would. I don't care whether it's a Republican or Democrat. I don't want a politician deciding my innocence or guilt. I mean, it's as simple as that. The president should say unequivocally, we're not going to kill non-combatants. We're not going to do PowerPoint presentations in the Oval Office on Tuesdays. We're not going to have terrorist Tuesdays for Americans. He should say that. I mean, I don't think it's that hard. It's an easy question to the president. Mr. President, are you going to have terrorist Tuesdays for Americans? Are you going to put flashcards of Americans up and pass them around the table in the Oval Office with pictures of Americans on them and decide who's going to die and who's going to live? Are you going to publicly charge people, or are you going to secretly charge people? Are you going to have any kind of trial or any kind of representation? Does anybody get a chance to say, hey, it wasn't me, I didn't do it? Does anybody get a chance to represent or have representation? This is an article that we found interesting also by Noah Schachtman. This was also printed in Wired. It's called U.S. Drones Can Now Kill Joe Schmo Militants in Yemen. This is not quite about the domestic issue so much and a little more about the foreign issue. But there is a linkage between the foreign drone attacks and what will become the domestic drone attacks. Why? Because that's the only drone attacks we know, and we've not been told that there will be an American plan for killing Americans and a foreign plan for killing Americans or foreigners overseas. We haven't been told that. We haven't been told anything. We've been told to go sit in a corner, including the Senate, including the Congress, sit down and be quiet. They've got a process. They've got a PowerPoint presentation. They've got flashcards. I don't think that's adequate. Noah Schachtman writes in Wired. He says in September, American-born militant Anwar al-Awlaki was killed by a U.S. drone strike in Yemen. In the 7 months since, the al-Qaeda affiliate there has grown in power, influence, and lethality. The American solution? Authorize more drone attacks. Kind of brings me back to that quote from the CIA agent. He said, drone attacks are like a lawnmower, but when you quit mowing the lawn, the terrorists come back. They sometimes may be more numerous. The question is, you have to always say, can you kill them all? Can you kill every terrorist in the world? Or for every terrorist you kill, maybe 3 or 4 pop up, maybe 10 pop up. What happens to the families of people who happen to be the ones we made mistakes on or happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? I know the president, his spokesman, found it cute to say, oh, they should have chosen better parents. They should have chosen a more responsible parents. I don't find that endearing or cute. I find that really reprehensible. To say that that's a standard. And you have to ask the question, is that going to be the standard in the United States? Are we going to kill people because they're related to bad people? And to flippantly say, should have chosen better parents after we kill a 16-year-old? Schachtman goes on to write, the American solution, authorize more drone attacks, and not just against well-known extremists like al-Awlaki, but against faceless, nameless, low-level terrorists as well. A relentless campaign of unmanned airstrikes has significantly weakened al-Qaeda's central leadership in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use drones. I'm not saying that they're not a valuable weapon that's helped us to decimate our enemies. I'm just saying that it's different in a war zone and in our country. And if the president can't acknowledge that being in battle somewhere is different than walking down the street in Washington or Baltimore or Philadelphia, if he can't acknowledge that there's a distinct difference, it's beyond me how we can let him get away with that. Militants that were chosen for these drone strikes or for robotic elimination were based solely on their intelligence signatures, their behavior, as captured by wiretaps, overhead surveillance, and local informants. So the people that are being killed in these drone strikes, and this is largely in the tribal areas in Pakistan, we don't know their names. We're targeting people whom we do not know their names. We can not really know much about them if we don't know their names. We're targeting them by their signatures, where they go, who they visit. Well, probably inevitably the milkman's got to go to the terrorist camp too, or the doctor as well. So probably maybe they're complicit, but some people who may not be quite the people we think we're after are in the caravan going from city to city. Maybe you're in the local food distribution business and you make good money selling it. But the question is whether or not that's the kind of standard you'd like to have in America, whether or not a signature strike would be acceptable in America. These are questions that ought to be asked, and the president ought to answer them. These people are being targeted by their signature. Their behavior is captured by wiretaps, overhead surveillance, and local informants. Schachtman goes on to say a similar approach might not work in this case, however. In Yemen, where we have a lot of drone strikes, he says every Yemeni is armed. It's going to be kind of hard to tell who's friend and foe when they're all armed and they're all fighting and they're all mad at each other. So how do they differentiate between suspected militants and armed Yemenis that are on our side? Schachtman goes on to say, what's more, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Yemeni affiliate of the terror collective, is joined at the hip with an insurgency largely focused on toppling the local government. Another official informed the Washington Post. So there's a very real risk that America is being perceived as taking sides in a civil war in Yemen. The Yemeni drone campaign, actually two separate efforts run by the CIA and the military's Joint Special Operations Command, will still be more tightly restricted than the Pakistani drone war at its peak. Potential targets need to be seen or heard doing something that indicates that they are plotting against the West or are high up the militant hierarchy. You don't necessarily need to know the guy's name. You don't have to have a 10-sheet dossier on him. But you have to know the activities of this person, what he's been engaged in, said one official. Gregory Johnson, a Yemen specialist at Princeton, believes that these signature strikes, or something an awful lot like them, have actually been going on for quite a while in Yemen. He goes on to say that he thinks al-Awlaki's son was killed just a month after his dad in a signature strike. He says that he thinks there's been 13 such attacks in Yemen in 2012. Now, when you talk to people around here, they'll just say, oh, there are no signature strikes. What are you supposed to believe? A lot of people are saying they have evidence and have heard there are signature strikes. Those in power who have the secrets say, oh, we're not. It's hard to know what to believe. I think one thing that is easy to understand, though, I said, I can't imagine we would allow such a standard in the United States where we don't name who we're killing and that we kill people involved in a caravan. I would think it should be pretty easy for the president to say there'll be no signature strikes in America. Schachtman goes on to say that many of these strikes have hit lower-level militants, not top terror names. This authorization only makes targeted killings legally and bureaucratically kosher. Despite the increased pace of strikes, though, 13 attacks are more than there were in all of 2011 on al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. In fact, White House counterterrorism advisor John Brennan last week called it the terror group's most active operational franchise. All of which leads Micah Zenko at the Council for Foreign Relations to wonder where this drone campaign is going. By any common sense definition, these vast targeted killings should be characterized as America's third war since 9/11. Unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, where government agencies acted according to articulated strategies, congressional hearings and press conferences provided some oversight, and timelines explicitly stated when the U.S. combat role would end. The third war is Orwellian in its lack of cogent strategy, transparency, and end date. Since these attacks are covert, the administration will offer no public defense. But it begs CIA Director Petraeus a haunting question at the onset of the Iraq War. Petraeus asked, "Tell me how this ends." That's a question I have for the president. How does the war end? How do we win? How do we declare victory, and when will the war end? The problem is that we have come up with a scheme that basically has no limitations, no geographic limitations on where the war is fought. It's hard to defeat an enemy if the entire war is the battlefield. That is a problem with determining victory. It's a problem with ultimately coming home. The other problem with having no geographic limitations to this is saying that war is here. That war is in America, and that the battlefield here at home is one that we're going to have rules, or the laws of war are going to apply in your everyday life. The Center for Constitutional Rights has taken a position and has been concerned, and this was before we were talking about drone strikes in America. The Center for Constitutional Rights has been concerned even about American citizens overseas. On September 30th, they put out this release. They said, today, in response to the news that a missile attack by an American drone attack has killed U.S. citizen Anwar al-Awlaki, the Center for Constitutional Rights, which had previously brought a challenge in federal court to the legality of the authorization to target al-Awlaki in Yemen, released the following statement. This is from the Center for Constitutional Rights. The assassination of al-Awlaki by American drone attacks is the latest of many affronts to domestic and international law. The targeted assassination program that started under Bush and was expanded under Obama essentially grants the executive the power to kill any U.S. citizen deemed to be a threat. Deemed to be a threat without any judicial oversight. or any of the rights afforded by the Constitution. If we allow such gross overreaches of power to continue, we are setting the stage for increasing erosions of civil liberties and the rule of law. Now, what they've said there is not completely non-controversial, and I really might even take some issue with the fact that they're saying the Constitution applies everywhere. Some argue that it applies to U.S. citizens whether they're here at home, and I think there's some debate to that. I think that the only place that we can guarantee that the Constitution applies is in our country. The only border that we ultimately control is in our country. The only courts that we ultimately control are here. However, the entity doing the killing is the American military killing a citizen overseas. So I personally have been of the belief that what we should do is try people for treason. It's one of the 4 crimes in the Constitution that is actually labeled, displayed, and given to the federal courts. There's actually specifics on what is actually treason. I personally don't think it would be that hard to try people for treason. I think you could do it without, you could start at the very top court and not have appeal after appeal. I think there was evidence that Al Walkie could have been tried in a federal court and convicted of treason and then targeted. People say, well, why would you want to give any protection to people who have denounced their citizenship and who hate America, who are conspiring with the enemy? And I guess the way I would respond is that, you know, I don't like murderers and rapists either. I don't like violent people who commit crime in our country. But because we prize our system so much, and because we want to make sure that we arrest, convict, and possibly execute the right person, we have trials. So we think it is pretty important that we have trials. And so I see that when people say these are bad people, yes, these are bad people. Many of them deserve what they get. The problem is if we give up on the process of how we do it, if we give up on the Constitution, or if we say that kind of standard is going to be brought back to the homeland, or if we say America is a battlefield, there is a real problem. You know, there's a problem to doing that, because I think if we do that, the standard becomes so loose that we really won't have what we really expect as Americans. The Center for Constitution Rights goes on with this comment by Pardis Kebrii, a senior staff attorney. They went to the court and they asked for information on some of these drone strikes, and they were denied. He responds that in dismissing our complaint, the district court noted that there were nonetheless disturbing questions raised by the authority being asserted by the United States. There certainly are disturbing questions that need to be asked again and answered by the U.S. government about the circumstances in killing and legal standard that governed it. In October of 2012, there was an article by Greg Miller in the Washington Post. It was entitled, "Plan for Hunting Terrorist Signals U.S. Intends to Keep Adding Names to Kill List." The editor notes that this project was based on interviews with dozens of current and former national security officials, intelligence analysts, and others who have examined and were examining the U.S. counterterrorism policies and the practice of targeted killings. This is the first of 3 stories that appeared. Over the past 2 years, the Obama administration has been secretly developing a new blueprint for pursuing terrorists, a next-generation targeting list called the Disposition Matrix. The matrix contains the names of terrorism suspects arrayed against an accounting of the resources being marshaled to track them down, including sealed indictments and clandestine operations. U.S. officials said that the database is designed to go beyond existing kill lists mapping plans for the disposition of suspects beyond the reach of American drones. Although the matrix is a work in progress, the effort to create this matrix reflects a reality setting in among the nation's counterterrorism ranks. The United States conventional wars are winding down, but the government expects to continue adding names to kill or capture lists for years. Among senior Obama administration officials, there's a broad consensus that such operations are likely to be extended at least another decade. Given the way al-Qaeda continues to metastasize, some officials say no clear end is in sight. We can't possibly kill everyone who wants to harm us, a senior administration official said. It's a necessary part of what we do. We're not going to wind up in 10 years in a world of everybody holding hands, though, and singing, "We love America." This timeline suggests that the United States has reached only the midpoint of what was once known as the global war on terror. Targeting lists that were regarded as finite emergency measures after the attacks of September 11th are now fixtures in the national security apparatus. The rosters expand and contract with the pace of drone strikes, but never go to zero. Meanwhile, a significant milestone looms. The number of militants and civilians killed in the drone campaign over 10 years will soon exceed 3,000 by certain estimates. We've heard an estimate recently by a member of the Senate who said 4,700 have been killed. The Obama administration has touted its successes against the terrorist network, including the death of Osama bin Laden, as signature achievements that argue for the president's reelection. The administration has taken tentative steps towards greater transparency, formally acknowledging for the first time the United States' use of armed drones. Less visible is the extent to which Obama has institutionalized the highly classified practice of targeted killing, transforming ad hoc elements into a counterterrorism infrastructure capable of sustaining a seemingly permanent war. Spokesmen for the White House, the National Counterterrorism Center, the CIA, and other agencies declined to comment on this matrix. Privately, though, officials acknowledge that the development of the matrix is part of a series of moves in Washington and overseas to embed counterterrorism tools into U.S. policy for the long haul. White House counterterrorism advisor John Brennan is seeking to codify the administration's approach to generating capture lists and kill lists as part of a broader effort. CIA Director David Petraeus is pushing for an expansion of the agency's fleet of armed drones. The proposal, which would need White House approval, reflects the agency's transformation into a paramilitary force and makes clear that it is not intended to dismantle its drone program and return to pre-September 11th focus on gathering intelligence. The U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, which carried out the raid that killed bin Laden, has moved commando teams into suspected terrorist hotbeds in Africa. A rugged U.S. outpost in Djibouti has been transformed into a launching pad for counterterrorism operations across the Horn of Africa and into the Middle East. The Joint Special Operations Command has also established a secret targeting center across the Potomac River from Washington. The current and former U.S. officials said the elite command's targeting cells have traditionally been located near the front lines of its missions, including Iraq and Afghanistan. But the Joint Committee has now created a National Capital Region task force that is a 15-minute commute from the White House so it could be more directly involved in deliberations about the al-Qaeda lists. The developments were described by current and former officials from the White House, as well as intelligence and counterterrorism agencies. Most spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the subject. These counterterrorism components have been affixed to a legal foundation for targeted killing that the Obama administration has discussed more openly over the past year. In a series of speeches, administration officials have cited legal bases, including the congressional authorization to use military force. This gets really to the crux of the matter, is that the authorization for all of these activities around the world, and then ultimately here at home, all come from the use of authorization of force when we went to war against Afghanistan after 9/11. The problem is how do we finally conclude war? Is perpetual war okay with everybody? How would we conclude the war in Afghanistan? The president said he's bringing troops home. It's actually another thing I admire from the president. I think it's time to come home. I think we've accomplished our battle. I think we've accomplished our plan. But the thing is if we're going to end the war, why would we not end the war? I think it means we end that war and we go somewhere else. There's a question whether we can continually afford perpetual war. There's a question whether it's advisable. There's a question of whether or not you go so many places that maybe in the end you're maybe doing more harm than good. The thing about the wars as they go on is we have to figure out a way to try to end war. We have to figure out a way to try to limit war. Our goal shouldn't be to expand war to proportions that have no limit, to say that there are no geographic limits on war. I don't think is something that we should be an admirable thing. I think that's a mistaken policy to think that we can say that we're going to have perpetual war with no limits, with no geographic limits, with no temporal limits. It's hard to end a war anymore, though. It used to be easy. In the old days, you won war and you came home. The problem is we can't even end the Iraq War. The Iraq War has been over for a couple of years now, at least a couple of years. I tried to introduce a resolution to end the Iraq War, to deauthorize the war, and it was voted down. I think I got less than 15 votes. How do you end war? The problem is that people take these resolutions and they stretch them and they pull them and they contort them to mean things that really they were never intended to mean. I don't think that being involved in a protracted war in Yemen or Mali or any of these other places was intended when we went to war in Afghanistan. I just don't think that was the intention. Now, critics contend that the justifications for the drone war have become more tenuous as the campaign has extended farther and farther beyond the core group of al-Qaeda operatives behind the strikes on New York and Washington. Critics note that the administration still doesn't confirm the CIA's involvement or the identities of those who were killed. Certain strikes are now under legal challenge, including the killing last year of the son of al-Awlaki. Counterterrorism experts have said, though, that the reliance on these targeted killings is self-perpetuating, yielding undeniable short-term results that may obscure the long-term costs. I think that's a good way of putting it, because when you think about it, obviously they're killing some bad people. This is war, and there's been some short-term good. The question is, does the short-term good outweigh the long-term cost? Not only just in dollars, but the long-term cost of whether or not we're encouraging a next generation of terrorists. This is a quote from Bruce Riedel, a former CIA analyst. He says, the problems with the drones is it's like your lawnmower. You got to mow the lawn all the time. The minute you stop mowing, the grass is going to grow back. Maybe there's an infinite number of terrorists. Maybe the drone strikes aren't the ultimate answer. There's 1 billion Muslims in the world. Maybe there needs to be some component of this that isn't just the killing fields. Now, I'm not saying that many of these people aren't allied against us and would attack us and they don't deserve to die. I'm just not sure that it's the ultimate answer. It's the ultimate way. I'm also concerned that many of the people who are the strongest proponents of this are also those who want to bring the war to America and say that America is part of this perpetual battlefield. The United States now operates multiple drone programs, including acknowledged U.S. military patrols over conflicted zones in Afghanistan and Libya, and classified CIA surveillance flights over Iran. Strikes against al-Qaeda, however, are carried out under secret lethal programs involving the CIA and the JSOC. The Matrix was developed by the NCTC under former director Michael Leiter to augment those organizations' separate but overlapping kill lists. The result is a single, continually evolving database in which biographies, locations, known associates, and affiliated organizations are all cataloged. So are strategies for taking targets down, including extradition requests, capture operations, and drone patrols. Obama's decisions to shutter the CIA's secret prisons ended a program that had become a source of international scorn, but it also complicated the pursuit of terrorists. Unless a suspect surfaced in the sights of a drone, the United States had to scramble to figure out what to do. We had a disposition problem, said a former U.S. counterterrorism official. The database is meant to map out contingencies, create an operational menu that spells out each agency's role in case of suspect surfaces in an unexpected spot. If he's in Saudi Arabia, picked up by the Saudis, the former official said, if traveling overseas to Al-Shabaab, we can pick him up by ship. If in Yemen, kill or have the Yemenis pick him up. There's been some discussion as to what to do with these people. It is a complicated situation. But I think the take-home message from all of this is that what we're stuck in is a very messy sort of decision-making, a type of decision-making that I don't think is appropriate for the homeland, is appropriate for the United States. I think the idea that in the United States that this is to be a battlefield and that you don't need an attorney, you don't need a court, or you don't get due process is really repugnant to the American people and should be. I think it's something that we have given up on too easily if we let the president dictate the terms of this. If the president is unwilling to say clearly and unequivocally that he's not going to kill non-combatants in America, I don't think we should tolerate that. I think there should be a huge outcry and the president should come forward and explain his position. This discussion tonight really isn't so much about John Brennan. It isn't about his nomination so much as it's about whether or not we believe that in America there are some rights that are so special that we're not willing to give up on these. So as we move forward into this debate, it's not really about who gets nominated to be the head of the CIA. It's about principles that are bigger than the people. It's about something bigger and larger than the people involved. It's about constitutional principles that really we shouldn't give up on. I think we should all judge as inadequate the president's response when he says he hasn't killed Americans in America yet, he doesn't intend to, but that he might. I don't think that that is a response that we should tolerate. And so as we move forward in this debate, we need to understand and we need to fight for something that is classically American, something that we're proud of and something that our soldiers fight for. And that is our rights, our individual rights, our right to be seen as an American, to be tried in a court by our peers. And I think if we're to give up on that, it's a huge mistake. One of the things we have to ask is, what kind of standard will there be? If there's going to be a program in America, what kind of standard? If we're going to kill Americans in America, what kind of standard will there be? If the standard is to be sympathy, you can imagine the craziness of this. Mr. President, I would at this time yield for a question without yielding the floor to my colleague from Kansas.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you. Through the President, I'd like to ask the Senator from Kentucky a couple of questions. I've been listening to the conversation, to the debate, to the discussion here on the Senate floor throughout the afternoon, and I would ask the Senator from Kentucky these questions. Is it not true that the Constitution of the United States is a document designed to protect the freedoms and liberties of Americans? Often the Constitution, I believe, I would ask again the Senator from Kentucky, is the document, while sometimes perceived to be a grant of authority, is not really the main purpose of the United States Constitution to make sure that the American people enjoy certain liberties and freedoms that the founding fathers who wrote that document believed were important for American citizens. And whether or not that's true, I'll let the gentleman from Kentucky tell me, but if that is the case, if it is constitutional to intentionally kill an American citizen in the United States without due process of law, then what is not constitutional under the United States Constitution? If the conclusion is reached, as the administration at least is unwilling to say is not the case, if the conclusion is reached that it is within the powers of the Constitution for the executive to allow for the killing of an American citizen in the United States, then what is left in our Constitution that would prohibit other behavior? If you can go this far, what liberties remain for Americans?
I think it's a good question, because ultimately the question is who gets to decide? Does the president get to decide unilaterally that he's going to do this? And how would you challenge it? If you're dead, you have a tough time challenging basically his authority to do this. But no, I can't imagine any way that you can usurp and go beyond the constitutional requirements in the United States. I see no way he can do that, and I can't imagine that he would even assert such a thing. But it still boggles the mind that he won't explicitly say that he will not do this.
Well, I would give request of the President to ask a question of the Senator from Kentucky. Again, in the absence of the assurance or the statement from the administration, from the President of the United States or his Attorney General, the appropriate venue, the Senator from Kentucky, is not the appropriate venue for us to insist upon that answer. Is it not appropriate for this to be the venue on which we as a United States Senate make clear that it is unconstitutional in our view for the death of United States citizen in the United States by military action? This is the opportune moment because of the pending confirmation of the nomination of the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so while today's order of business really is an administrative appointment, is this issue not so important that we need to utilize this moment, this time in the United States Senate, to make certain that that question is answered in a way that makes clear not only for today and for the current occupant of the CIA and its administration, but for all future Americans, all future CIAs, all future military leaders, that it is clear that in the United States, American citizens cannot be killed without due process of law.
Mr. President, I think it's a good point. I think it's also a point to be made that would be also one resolution to this impasse, would be to have a resolution come forward from this Senate saying exactly that our understanding is, and this has been something that Senator Cruz and I have discussed, is that whether or not we should limit the president's power by legislation or by resolution, basically saying that repelling an imminent threat is something the president can do, but killing non-combatants is not something that's allowed under the Constitution. And I think the courts would rule that way, should the courts ever have to rule on this, but it'd be much simpler and more healthy for the country if the president would simply come out publicly and say that.
Perhaps, Mr. President, finally, I would ask the senator from Kentucky, while this opportunity to discuss this issue on the Senate floor has occurred today, it certainly is an opportunity for the American people to understand a significant basic constitutional right may be at stake. And while the senator from Kentucky has led this discussion, I would ask him, has he now received, as a result of bringing this attention to this issue, any additional reassurances from the Attorney General or the President of the United States that the administration agrees that there is no constitutional right to end the life of an American citizen using a drone flying over the lands of the United States and attacking a United States citizen?
Mr. President, since we began this today, I've had no communication from the White House or the Attorney General. The only thing we've gotten indirectly was that the Attorney General was before the Judiciary Committee today, and that he did seem to backtrack or acknowledge a little bit under withering cross-examination. He was not very forthcoming in saying that what we would like to hear is that they will not kill non-combatants in America. But I think that's still a possibility from them. And I think his answers weren't inconsistent with that. But you would think it would be a little bit easier, and they would make it easier on everyone. And you would think they would want to reassure the public that they have no intention, not just they have no intention, but that they won't kill Americans.
Again, Mr. President, to the senator from Kentucky, while there is a significant important issue before the United States Senate today, and that is the confirmation of the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, I would ask the senator from Kentucky, is not the more important issue, the less pedestrian issue that we face here on the Senate floor and in the United States of America, one that has been with us throughout our history, one that was with us when the Constitution was written and one that is with us every day thereafter, and that is, what are the meanings of the words contained in the United States Constitution, and what do they mean for everyday citizens that they know that their own government is constrained by a document created now more than 200 years ago? Is that not the most important question that faces our country, its citizens, on a daily, ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think American citizens get that. But not only that, I come from a state that has 2 large military bases, and when our soldiers go off, when I talk to them, they talk of fighting for our Bill of Rights. They talk of fighting for our Constitution. They don't think they're going off to conquer any people. They truly believe, and they honestly appraise that they're fighting for our Bill of Rights. So that's why I see this as somewhat of an insult to our soldiers to say that, and to insinuate somehow that the Bill of Rights just isn't so important, that our fear is going to guide us away or take us away from something so fundamental and so important. But I think Americans do realize that the protections of having a jury trial are incredibly important, and that assessing guilt's not always easy when you're accused of a crime. I think that Americans do know that it's really important to try to get it right when someone's accused of a crime. And so I think American people are with us in wanting to find these answers. And you're right that this isn't ultimately about the nomination. This is about a question that's bigger, I think, than any individual. And it's about something that our country was founded upon. And that's basically, the individual rights.
Mr. President, I thank the senator from Kentucky for responding to my questions.
Mr. President, we've had a good and healthy debate today. I think we've hit upon a few points. We may have even hit a couple of points more than once. I think that when we think about and put in perspective, so many of the battles that we have up here are battles that I think the American public sometimes is disgusted with. They see a lot of things that we do as petty and partisan. And sometimes I see disagreements up here who I think are completely partisan and completely petty on both sides. But I think this issue is different in the sense that this isn't about this particular individual and their nomination. I've actually voted for the president's first 3 nominations to his cabinet. So I haven't taken a partisan position that the president can't nominate his political appointees. I have looked carefully at the nominees. I've asked for more information. I've tried to extend debate on some of the nominees. But in the end, I voted for 3 out of 3 and many of the judges that the president's put forward. Not because I necessarily agree with their politics. I don't agree with much of the president's politics. In fact, one of the few things I did agree with the president on was the idea of civil liberties, was the idea that you don't tap someone's phone without a warrant, that you don't torture Americans, and really that you don't kill Americans without due process. These are things that really I thought the president and I agreed on. So I'm not so sure exactly, where we stand with that. And I actually kind of think that probably he still does agree with me, or I still agree with him. But the question is, why can't he publicly go ahead and announce that he's not going to kill non-combatants? Okay. Okay. Resolution that we've talked about. And this resolution says to express the sense of the Senate against the use of drones to execute American citizens on American soil. Expressing the sense of the Senate against the use of drones to execute American citizens on American soil. Resolved that it is the sense of the Senate that the use of drones to execute or target American citizens on American soil who pose no imminent threat clearly violates the constitutional due process of rights. The American people deserve a clear, concise, and unequivocal public statement from the President of the United States that contains detailed legal reasoning, including but not limited to the balance between national security and due process, limits of executive power, and distinction between the treatment of citizens and non-citizens within and outside the borders of the United States. The use of lethal force against American citizens and the use of drones in the application of the lethal force within the United States territory. At this time, I would ask unanimous consent. Wait, I was going to do it in just... There's another article that I think is of interest, and this is another article by Spencer Ackerman in Wired. This talks about, once again, the signature strikes and the idea that basically we're killing people whose names we don't know. The title of this was CIA Drones Kill Large Groups Without Knowing Who They Are. The expansion of the CIA's undeclared drone war into the tribal areas of Pakistan required a big expansion of who can be marked for death. Once the standard for targeted killings was top-level leaders in al-Qaeda or one of its allies. That's long gone, especially as the number of people targeted have grown. This is the new standard, according to a blockbuster piece in the Wall Street Journal. Men believed to be militants associated with terrorist groups, but whose identities aren't always known, may be targeted. Ready to go or not? The CIA is now killing people without knowing who they are, on suspicion of association with terrorist groups. The article does not define the standards, but the standards are said to be suspicion and association. While this is overseas, it kind of gets to the point we've been talking about, is what is the standard that will be used in America? If we were to have drone strikes in America, what is the standard that we will use? Is it a standard that says that you have to be suspicious or that you have to be associated? Strikes targeting those people, usually groups of such people, are what we call signature strikes. The bulk of CIA's drone strikes are signature strikes now, which is a remarkable thing. So what we're talking about, and that's one of the reasons why we're concerned here, is that if the president claims that he can do strikes in America and the bulk of the current strikes overseas are signature strikes, wouldn't it be worrisome that we could kill people in America without even knowing their name? The bulk of the CIA strikes now are signature strikes. It was written in the Wall Street Journal in an article by Adam Entois and Siobhan Gorman and Julian Barnes. And the bulk really means the bulk. The journal reports that the growth in clusters of people targeted by the CIA has required the agency to tell its Pakistani counterparts about mass attacks. So we're talking about pretty significant attacks here. They're only notifying them when they're going to kill more than 20 at a time. Determining who is a target is not a question of intelligence collection. The cameras on the CIA fleet of Predators and Reapers work just fine. It's a question of intelligence analysis. Interpreting the imagery collected from the drones, from the spies and spotters below to understand who's a terrorist and who, say, drops off the terrorist laundry. Admittedly, in a war with a shadowy enemy, it can be difficult to distinguish between the two. So the question is this the kind of standard we will use in the United States? Will we use a standard where people don't have to be named? We don't know. The president has indicated that his drone strikes in America will have different rules than his drone strikes outside of America, but we've heard no rules on what those drone strikes will be. So we have drone strikes inside and outside. They're going to have different rules, but we already know that a large percentage of the drone strikes overseas, we're not naming the person. Is that going to be the standard? We also know that we have targeted people for sympathizing with the enemy. We talked about that before. In the 1960s, we had many people who sympathized with North Vietnam. Many people will remember Jane Fonda swiveling herself around in the North Vietnamese artilleries and thinking gleefully that she was just right at home with the North Vietnamese. Now, while I'm not a great fan of Jane Fonda, I'm really not so interested in putting her on a drone kill list either. We've had many people who have dissented in our country. We've had people in our country who have been against the Afghan war, against the Iraq war. I was opposed to the Iraq war. There have been people who are against the government on occasion. What are the criteria for who will be killed? Does the Fifth Amendment apply? Will the list be secret or not secret? Can you kill non-combatants? And people say, well, the president would never kill non-combatants. The problem is that's who we're killing overseas. Now, we are alleging that they may be conspiring someday to be combatants, so they might have been yesterday, but are we going to take that same kind of standard and use it in America? Are we going to have a standard that if you're, on your iPad typing emails in a cafe, that you can be targeted for a drone strike? These are not questions that are inconsequential. These are questions that should be known, and these are questions that should be public. These are questions that should be discussed in Congress. These are questions. In fact, we shouldn't be asking him for drone memos. We should be giving him drone memos. We shouldn't be asking him how he's going to run the drone program. We should be telling him how he's to run the drone program. That is our authority. We've abdicated our authority. We don't do what we're supposed to. We are supposed to be the checks and balances. But we've let the president make these decisions because we have largely abdicated our responsibility. In this Spencer Ackerman story from Wired, he talks about and goes on to say, fundamentally, though, it's a question of policy, whether it's acceptable for the CIA to kill someone without truly knowing if he's the bombsmith or the laundry guy. The Journal reports that the CIA's willingness to strike without such knowledge, sanctioned in full by President Barack Obama, is causing problems for the State Department and the military. As we've written this week, the high volume of drone attacks in Pakistani tribal areas contributes to Pakistani intransigence on another issue of huge importance to the U.S., convincing Pakistan to deliver the insurgent groups it sponsors to peace talks aimed at ending the Afghan war. The drones don't cause that intransigence. Pakistani leaders, after all, cooperate with the drones and exploit popular anti-American sentiment to shake down Washington. The strikes become cards for Pakistan to play, however cynically. And I think this is quite true of Pakistan. They play both sides to the middle, and they play both sides to get more money from us. I think they've been complicit in the drone attacks, and then they complain about them publicly. They have two faces, one to their people and one privately to us. But the question is, have we gotten involved more in Pakistan than getting al-Qaeda leaders, and have we gotten more involved with a war in Pakistan that involves people who want to be free of their central government? Ultimately, we as a country need to figure out how to end war. We've had the war in Afghanistan for 12 years now. The war basically has authorized a worldwide war. Not only am I worried about the perpetual nature of the war, I'm also worried about that there is no geographic limitations to the war, but I'm particularly concerned, and what today has all been about, is that I'm worried that they say that the United States is the battlefield now. My side, their side, the president, everybody thinks that America's the battlefield. The problem is they also think you don't get due process in a battlefield. And largely they're correct. When you're overseas in a battlefield, it's hard to have due process. We're not going to ask for Miranda rights before we shoot people in battle. But America is different. So one of the most important things I hope that will come from today is that people will say, and people will listen, how do we end the war in Iraq? How do we end the war in Afghanistan? I tried to get a vote. I did get a vote. I tried to end the Iraq war 2 years after it ended by taking away the authorization of use of force, and I still couldn't get that voted on. It's even more important not to end the war in Iraq, but ultimately to end the war in Afghanistan. Because the war in Afghanistan, the use of authorization of force is used to create a worldwide war without limitations. To create a war that some say the battlefield is here at home. This battlefield being here at home means you don't get due process at home. There have been members of the Senate stand up and say when they ask you for a lawyer, you tell them to shut up. Is that the kind of due process we want in our country? Is that what we're moving towards? So the questions we're asking here are important questions. And these questions are, does the Bill of Rights apply? Can they have exceptions to the Bill of Rights? I'm not asking them to... Do they know that? One of the articles from National Review recently was by Kevin Williamson, and we got into this a little bit earlier. And